There are moments in life when the quiet truth beneath everything begins to speak, not through loud revelations, but through a subtle discomfort that rises each time you measure yourself against someone else's path. It may begin in the smallest gesture, the way your chest tightens when you see another person thriving, or how your breath subtly shortens when you feel you're falling behind. This tension is not a flaw in your character. It is a whisper from your inner world, revealing how deeply you've been pulled away from your own rhythm. Comparison does not simply bruise your confidence. It slowly rearranges the way you inhabit your life, pulling your attention outward until you forget the texture of who you are when no one is watching. And without noticing, you begin to shape your worth through borrowed mirrors, each one distorting the truth of your existence. Yet beneath this restless pattern, there is a kind of longing, a desire to return to the quiet territory inside yourself where your intuition still remembers the direction of your becoming. Prosperity, in its most honest form, does not blossom in the noise of competition, but in the spaciousness created when you stop abandoning your own path to examine the paths of others. When comparison loosens its grip, your energy stops leaking into stories that were never meant to be yours. What emerges then is a different kind of clarity, the sense that your life has always been waiting for you to inhabit it fully. And it is from that place of presence, not pressure, that true prosperity begins to take root. There is a quiet ache that accompanies the moments when you turn your attention outward and let the shape of someone else's life define the contours of your own. It rarely begins with a dramatic realization. Instead, it appears in the subtle tightening behind your ribs when you scroll through glimpses of another person's success, as if their brightness somehow casts a shadow over what you have been building. That tension is not a sign of failure, but a sign of disconnection, a reminder that a part of you has been wandering too far from your inner ground. When comparison takes root, it rearranges your inner landscape, shifting your focus toward what is missing rather than what is quietly forming. And the more you lean into these borrowed measures, the more distant your own truth becomes, as though your life begins speaking in a voice that is not entirely yours. In the background of this habitual comparison, something deeper unfolds, a fatigue that settles over your emotional field, one that isn't caused by physical exhaustion, but by the weight of carrying stories that do not belong to you. Every moment spent looking sideways pulls you a little further from the path that once felt authentic, and without realizing it, you start treating your own journey as a series of adjustments rather than an expression of your essence. This internal strain often shows itself not through dramatic collapse, but through small misalignments, a loss of enthusiasm for what once inspired you, a hesitation to commit to ideas that once felt alive, or a quiet sense that you're living 1 second behind your own heartbeat. It's in these quiet misalignments that you begin to understand how deeply comparison affects not only how you see yourself, but how you inhabit the world. As this pattern becomes familiar, your inner terrain starts to reshape itself around the expectation of proving worth. There is always something to chase, something to fix, something to match. And because the goalposts shift constantly, your sense of arrival becomes elusive. The mind becomes trained to scan for evidence of inadequacy, as though safety depends on staying alert to the places where you fall short. Over time, this vigilance becomes a form of emotional armor, heavy, rigid, and draining. It shields you not from the world, but from the intimacy of being present with your own growth. The exhaustion that follows is not the kind that rest alone heals. It is the exhaustion that comes from living a life measured by patterns that do not reflect your soul's timing. Yet beneath this exhaustion lies an unspoken longing, a subtle pull toward something more grounded, more tender, more true. It is the longing to return to yourself, to remember that your worth was never meant to be validated by external reflections. This longing is not a weakness. It is the first sign that your inner wisdom is awakening, gently reminding you that your life was never meant to be a comparison chart. It was meant to be an unfolding, one that requires spaciousness rather than pressure. When you begin to sense this longing, even in the smallest ways, it becomes a doorway into a different rhythm, one that does not rush you or demand proof, but invites you to inhabit your life from the inside out. And as you step into this rhythm, something opens. The tension in your chest softens, not because your circumstances suddenly change, but because your relationship with yourself begins to shift. You start to notice the subtle cues of your own energy, the way your body relaxes when you follow what feels aligned, the quiet stability that emerges when you no longer force yourself into molds that never fit. This shift is not loud or dramatic. It is a slow awakening, like morning light stretching across a quiet room. In this light, you begin to see that your path has always had its own timing, its own cadence, its own seasons of growth. And none of these were ever meant to be compared to someone else's seasons. The more you turn inward, the more the noise of comparison begins to lose its grip. What once felt like an urgent need to match the pace of others begins to fade, replaced by a sense of reverence for your own process. You start to understand that prosperity is not something you chase through the eyes of those around you. It is something you cultivate through presence, honesty, and alignment. Prosperity grows where there is coherence, where your thoughts, choices, and deeper truths move in the same direction. And coherence cannot exist when your attention is fractured by the constant need to measure yourself against external standards. As this coherence forms, a new kind of clarity emerges. You begin to recognize the quiet strengths you carried all along, the resilience formed through challenges no one saw, the compassion shaped by losses you rarely speak about, the wisdom gathered through quiet introspection. These qualities, once overshadowed by comparison, begin to take their rightful place at the center of your identity. You realize that what makes your path meaningful is not how it looks from the outside, but how deeply it reflects who you are becoming. And in this recognition, the pressure to achieve a certain image dissolves, replaced by a desire to live in a way that feels true. With this shift, your relationship with time also transforms. Instead of rushing to catch up, you begin to trust the unfolding of your own seasons. You sense that every delay, every pause, every moment of uncertainty carried something essential. Life ceases to feel like a race and becomes more like a conversation, one in which your soul finally has space to speak. And as you listen, you discover that your path has always been guided by something quieter and more enduring than comparison could ever offer. By allowing this inner space to expand, you create the foundation for a different kind of prosperity, one that does not depend on competition but on alignment. This prosperity is not about accumulation, it is about coherence. It grows where your energy is no longer scattered, where your attention is anchored in what is real, where your choices emerge from truth rather than fear. And in that space, the life that once felt out of reach begins to move toward you, not because you chased it, but because you finally became available to receive it. There is a particular stillness that rises when you begin to notice how deeply comparison shapes the architecture of your inner world. It is the moment when you pause long enough to feel the subtle unease beneath your thoughts, as though a part of you has been quietly negotiating your worth through reflections that were never meant to define you. This stillness is not empty. It holds the weight of years spent measuring yourself against timelines, achievements, and paths that had nothing to do with your own. And as this understanding settles, it becomes clear that the habit of comparison is not rooted in vanity or insecurity, but in an ancient instinct to belong, an instinct that has been misdirected towards standards that do not nourish your spirit. In the human mind, comparison often arises from the desire to feel safe, to confirm that you are not drifting too far from what others deem acceptable. Yet this safety is an illusion, fragile and inconsistent. The more you depend on external measures to determine your value, the more unstable your inner foundation becomes. You begin to adjust your expression, your pace, and even your dreams to align with what seems admired in others. And while this may offer temporary validation, it gradually distances you from the quiet intelligence guiding your own evolution. What makes this pattern so subtle is that it does not disrupt your life abruptly. Instead, it dissolves your authenticity one small compromise at a time. Over time, these compromises shape the way you perceive yourself. You might begin to believe that your progress is insufficient, that your timing is wrong, or that your story lacks the brilliance you see in the lives around you. This belief does not come from truth, but from a distorted lens that magnifies what others display and diminishes what you carry within. And because so much of comparison happens internally, it can feel like a private struggle, one that you rarely name aloud, but that affects every decision you make. The mind grows restless, the heart grows cautious, and the body carries the tension of trying to meet expectations that never belonged to you in the first place. When you look beneath this restlessness, you often find a quiet grief, the grief of having abandoned parts of yourself to meet invisible standards. It is the grief of ideas you never pursued because someone else seemed ahead, of dreams you postponed because you believed you needed to catch up first, of inner longings you muted because they did not match the rhythm of the world around you. This grief deserves recognition, not judgment. It reveals how sensitive your spirit truly is, how deeply you long to feel aligned, how much of your energy has been spent trying to earn a sense of worth that was always meant to arise from within. As you acknowledge this grief, something within you begins to soften. You start to understand that the impulse to compare does not make you weak, it makes you human. And yet, there is a deeper truth beneath this humanness. The truth that your life was never designed to follow the same shape as anyone else's. You were not meant to be a reflection, you were meant to be a presence. This presence cannot be accessed through striving or imitation. It reveals itself only when you return to the rhythm of your own breath, your own timing, your own unfolding. In this return, the noise of comparison gradually loses its authority, and your inner voice grows clearer, steadier, more trustworthy. As this inner voice strengthens, it begins to reshape your perception of prosperity. Prosperity stops being a race toward specific achievements and becomes a state of coherence, a deep alignment between what you feel, what you choose, and what you express. This coherence is subtle, yet profound. It is felt in the calm that arises when you stop forcing your path to resemble someone else's. It is experienced in the renewed energy that comes when you stop scattering your attention across other people's victories. Prosperity is not something you borrow from the lives you observe. It is something you cultivate by honoring the truth of your own being. When comparison loosens its grip, your inner world becomes more spacious. In this spaciousness, your creativity begins to breathe again. Ideas that once felt distant return with clarity. Desires you had silenced begin to speak in a quiet but steady tone. You start noticing what truly resonates with your spirit, and what was merely inherited from the expectations of others. This discernment is one of the earliest signs of inner prosperity, a sign that your energy is returning to its rightful place within you. With this return comes an unexpected sense of freedom. You no longer feel rushed by timelines that are not your own. You no longer seek validation through alignment with external milestones. You begin to understand that your timing is not late or early, it is simply yours. And as you accept this truth, the pressure that once constricted your inner space dissolves. What remains is a state of presence, a grounded awareness that allows you to build your life from a place of clarity rather than comparison. This presence does not eliminate the challenges of the world, but it transforms the way you move through them. Instead of shrinking before the accomplishments of others, you begin to observe them with a sense of openness, recognizing that their path speaks to their soul, just as your path speaks to yours. The successes of others stop feeling like reminders of what you lack, and instead become reminders of what is possible when a person aligns with their truth. This shift is not only emotional, but energetic. It creates a field around you that is receptive, grounded, and fertile, a field through which your own prosperity can find its way to you. As you inhabit this field, you begin to embody a deeper form of self-respect. You acknowledge your past without shame, your present without comparison, and your future without fear. In this acknowledgement, your life begins to expand. The opportunities that once felt distant become accessible not because you chase them, but because you are finally standing in the fullness of who you are, unfragmented, undistracted, and no longer defined by the reflections of others. There comes a moment in every inner journey when you begin to sense that your life is asking for a deeper kind of honesty, one that cannot be reached while your attention remains scattered across the stories of others. This moment often arrives quietly, like a shift in the atmosphere, a subtle awareness that you have been living too far from the center of your own being. It is within this awareness that you start to recognize the profound cost of comparison, not only in how it shapes your thinking, but in how it distorts your relationship with your own uniqueness. The truth is that you were never meant to replicate the rhythm of another person's life. You were meant to embody a frequency that only your soul knows how to express. And each time you measure yourself against someone else, you dim the very essence that was meant to guide you toward prosperity. This essence, your inner signature, holds the memories of your resilience, the depth of your compassion, and the quiet wisdom formed through experiences no one else has lived. Yet comparison teaches you to overlook these qualities. convincing you that only what is visible or celebrated externally has value. Over time, this belief creates a subtle fracture within you, a disconnect between the life you are meant to build and the life you think you should be building. The fracture widens whenever you silence your desires, because they do not resemble the desires of those around you, or when you abandon ideas that once felt alive because someone else has already done something similar. These small acts of self-abandonment accumulate until you begin to feel like a stranger to your own potential. When you finally pause long enough to acknowledge this dissonance, a shift begins to occur. You start to see that comparison has not merely been a mental habit, it has been an energetic filter, shaping the way you perceive your own worth. Through this filter, your strengths appear smaller, your progress slower, and your dreams more distant. But when you remove the filter, even momentarily, you begin to sense the truth beneath it. You start to feel the quiet power of your individuality, the specificity of your gifts, the depth of your lived experience. And from that place, your path no longer feels inadequate. It feels uniquely yours. This recognition marks the beginning of a deeper awakening. You realize that the people you once compared yourself to were not evidence of your inadequacy, but reflections of what is possible when someone commits to living in alignment with their truth. Instead of seeing them as reminders of where you fall short, you begin to see them as reminders of the potential within you. Their path becomes their own offering to the world, while your path becomes an invitation to express the singular shape of your existence. And in this recognition, the pressure to compete dissolves, replaced by a quiet reverence for the journey you are destined to walk. As this reverence expands, you begin to understand that prosperity does not arise from conformity, but from authenticity. It does not come from winning a race, but from tending to the inner soil in which your purpose grows. Authentic prosperity asks for presence rather than performance, alignment rather than imitation. It asks that you listen to the rhythms of your own body, the subtle shifts in your emotional landscape, the intuitive whisper that guides you toward what feels true, even when it defies outer expectations. When you honor these internal cues, your life begins to unfold in harmony with its natural timing, not in reaction to external comparisons. This unfolding invites you to explore parts of yourself that were once overshadowed by doubt. You may rediscover passions that you set aside because they did not appear practical or impressive. You may reconnect with the quiet abilities that once felt insignificant, but now reveal themselves as essential threads of your unique contribution. You may even notice how moments of difficulty taught you something that others could not teach, a depth of insight that comes only from having lived through what you lived through. And as these realizations surface, you begin to see your story not as a deviation from some imagined ideal, but as a path that has been preparing you for a life only you can create. With this understanding, comparison loses its emotional weight. The accomplishments of others no longer feel like evidence against you. They become neutral, even inspiring. You stop trying to match the pace of anyone else and begin to trust the cadence of your own unfolding. You stop shrinking before the brilliance of others and start recognizing the brilliance that arises when you inhabit your own essence fully. This shift is not merely psychological, it is energetic. It alters the frequency through which you move through the world, aligning you with opportunities, connections, and insights that resonate with your truth. From this place, you begin to experience prosperity in a new way. It becomes less about accumulation and more about expansion. An expansion of clarity, of groundedness, of willingness to show up as your whole self. You feel a renewed sense of presence, as though the noise within you has settled enough for you to hear your own inner guidance again. And as you listen, the path ahead becomes clearer, not because it was hidden before, but because your attention was too entangled in external narratives to recognize it. Now, freed from the pressure to compare, you begin to walk your life with a different posture, steadier, more open, more rooted in your truth. You move not with urgency but with intention, not with fear but with quiet confidence. And in this grounded movement, prosperity finds you not as a distant possibility, but as a natural expression of who you are becoming. There is a certain tenderness required when you begin to unlearn the patterns that have shaped your inner world for so long. Comparison is not simply a habit of the mind, it is a rhythm the body has learned to hold, a tension woven into your breath, a vigilance that has followed you through years of believing you must constantly evaluate your worth. When you start loosening this pattern, You're not merely changing a thought, you're changing the way your entire being relates to itself. And this shift, though subtle in its beginning, carries the power to restore a depth of peace and coherence that comparison quietly eroded over time. At first, the process may feel like stepping into unfamiliar territory. When you stop measuring your life through the lens of others, the silence that follows can feel disorienting. You may notice the absence of urgency, the absence of judgment, the absence of the inner commentary that once guided your decisions. This silence is not emptiness, it is the beginning of spaciousness. In this space, you encounter yourself without interruption, without distortion, without the constant pull of external narratives. The stillness may feel almost too soft at first, as though your mind is waiting for the familiar tension to return. But with each moment you choose presence over comparison, the stillness strengthens, becoming a refuge rather than a void. In this refuge, you begin to recognize how much energy comparison has consumed. You may recall moments when your creativity felt small because you believed someone had done it better, or when your joy felt muted because your accomplishments did not appear as bright as the ones you witnessed around you. These memories are not reminders of failure, but reminders of how deeply you longed to feel aligned with your own life. As you acknowledge them, you release yourself from the weight of expectations that were never yours to carry. What was once a source of tension becomes a source of understanding, and understanding becomes the foundation from which your inner transformation grows. As this foundation settles, the body begins to relax in ways it has not felt in years. The shoulders drop, the breath lengthens, the heart begins to move with a steadier rhythm. These shifts are subtle, but they signal a recalibration taking place beneath the surface, an unraveling of old emotional patterns and the emergence of new ones. With each breath, your system learns that it no longer needs to brace itself for comparison or judgment. It begins to trust your presence, your awareness, your willingness to inhabit yourself fully. This trust is the soil in which authentic prosperity takes root. From this soil, new forms of clarity emerge. You begin to discern what truly nourishes your spirit and what merely distracts it. You notice which activities drain you, which environments pull you into old habits, and which relationships misalign you with your truth. Instead of forcing yourself to fit into spaces that constrict you, you become more attuned to the spaces that expand you. This attunement is not about control, it is about alignment. It teaches you to choose what deepens your presence rather than what amplifies your insecurity, to follow what strengthens your inner coherence rather than what feeds your comparison-driven impulses. As coherence grows, your inner guidance begins to speak with greater clarity. It does not shout, it does not demand, it whispers through intuition, through subtle impulses, through moments of resonance that feel almost like remembering. This guidance invites you to move at the pace of your own becoming rather than the pace of external timelines. It invites you to honor the quiet truth that prosperity is not something you chase, but something you receive when you inhabit your life with sincerity. And the more you listen, the more your actions begin to reflect this truth. You choose differently, not out of fear, not out of pressure, but out of alignment. This alignment transforms the way you relate to the world. You stop seeking permission from external reflections and begin finding validation within your own presence. You stop chasing experiences that make you appear prosperous and start cultivating experiences that make you feel prosperous. The difference is profound. One creates exhaustion, the other creates depth. One keeps you reaching outward, the other brings you inward. And it is in this inward movement that prosperity begins to gather around you in forms both subtle and expansive. As this inner expansion continues, something remarkable happens. You begin to celebrate the lives of others without feeling diminished. Their growth does not threaten your becoming. It reflects the infinite ways life can unfold when a person follows their truth. You see their success not as a measure of your distance, but as confirmation that abundance is not scarce. This shift, from comparison to appreciation, expands your emotional field. It softens your heart. It dissolves the invisible walls that once separated you from your own potential. And in this openness, you become a clearer vessel for the prosperity that has been seeking you all along. With each step you take in this direction, your life begins to feel less like a performance and more like a homecoming. You no longer move through your days striving to prove your worth. You move through them, remembering it. And as you remember, your choices naturally begin to reflect a deeper level of integrity. You honor your limits, not out of fear, but out of respect. You honor your desires, not out of entitlement, but out of authenticity. You honor your pace because you finally understand that your life unfolds in cycles of growth that cannot be rushed or compared. By the time you reach this understanding, comparison is no longer the force that shapes your path. It becomes a faint echo in the background, a pattern you recognize but no longer obey. What guides you now is presence, steady, grounded, and aligned with the truth of who you are becoming. And from this place, prosperity stops being a distant vision and becomes the natural expression of your inner coherence. There is a quiet clarity that arrives when you finally stop borrowing the shape of your life from the reflections of others. It is not a dramatic revelation, nor a sudden awakening, but a gradual softening, a return to yourself that feels like stepping into a room you forgot you had built. Throughout this journey, you have seen how comparison fragments your energy, scattering your attention across stories that were never meant to hold your truth. And yet, as you moved through each chapter, something within you began to settle, as though the ground beneath your feet were becoming more familiar, more welcoming, more your own. What you may realize now is that prosperity was never waiting for you in someone else's path. It was always waiting in the quiet parts of your own. Real prosperity is not an achievement, but an alignment, not a race, but a resonance. It grows in the spaces where you stop abandoning yourself, where you choose presence over pressure, where you listen to the subtle cues of your inner world instead of the noise of external expectations. It emerges when you allow your natural rhythm to guide you, even when that rhythm does not match what you see around you. And as you stand here at the threshold between who you were and who you are becoming, you may feel a new sense of spaciousness, an inner opening that invites your life to breathe again. This space is your inheritance. It is where your creativity returns, where your intuition becomes clearer, where your path begins to reveal its next step without force. It is the space where your worth becomes unmistakable, not because of comparison, but because you finally see yourself without distortion. If you carry anything from this journey, let it be the reminder that the life meant for you is shaped from the inside out. The moment you stop looking sideways, the path forward becomes visible. And it is in walking that path with sincerity, presence, and trust that prosperity, true, grounded, internal prosperity, begins to root itself in every area of your life. As you reach this final moment, ask yourself with complete honesty, what part of your life has been waiting for you to stop comparing long enough to finally step into it? That question alone has the power to shift your entire direction, because the answer is already alive within you, waiting for acknowledgement. If this message resonated with your heart, I invite you to stay connected to this journey. Subscribe to the channel so you can continue receiving teachings that support your inner expansion, your healing, and your path toward authentic prosperity. And don't leave yet. Your transformation does not end here. Continue watching the video that appears on your screen now. It was chosen to guide your next step, deepen your understanding, and sustain the energy you have awakened today. Your journey is unfolding. Stay with it.